Okay, we finished with attributes. We finished with symbols, definition. I'd like to talk about entity right now. If you remember with the symbols, we said that an entity represents information, and it is represented by a rectangle. Here we have the entity name, and here we have the entity attribute key underlined. Here we have attribute 1 and attribute n. Just for argument's sake and just so that we can contextualize, let's take the entity student. You're all students, I hope. And we'll call this student. Okay? And then we will have here student ID. And we'll be simple now. Student name. We have student address, student gender. Okay? Do you see anything else I'm missing here? Yes, I'm missing one. Underline the primary key. Because all your information in the university database is identified by a unique identifier. That's your student ID. There are no two students who have the same ID. Of course, you can realize that this would not work otherwise. So, what does this mean? What does this entity means with attributes? If we look at Excel, it means like it's a table where you have here in columns student ID, you have student name, student address, student gender, and you just fill it up. What you do is you put student ID 888 blah 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 blah. Name is George, address is so on, gender is male. Name, student ID is 5, name Monica Lewinsky, address White House, gender, now it's male. We go student ID 4, student name could be Bill Clinton, White House, male, and so on. So in effect, you have a table that gives you a list of all the students. Two things you have to understand: that this table is what we call in ERD terminology, we call student entity. To be more specific, it is not the table with all the information in it. The entity is the student entity, or the structure of student table. This is the structure of the student table, which identifies, of course, the columns. In Access, these columns, which we call in Excel, in Access they're called fields. In ERD, they're called attributes. Now, one piece of information which constitutes one row in Access, which constitutes one record, which constitutes one row in Excel, and which constitutes one record in Access, in here, this is called an occurrence, which is a row which is one student information, or which is a record in Access. Now to finish with the entity, let's recall, what does entity mean? Remember, you all work with Excel, and in Excel, which is a spreadsheet, you have a table which is made of columns and which is made of rows. These columns, this column in Excel is called, and put it this way, this column is called a column in a table. This table is called a table. Okay? And the row in Excel is called a row. If we go into Access, which is the database, Microsoft Access, we also have a table. The terminology is a little bit different. We have columns, but the columns in Access, the column is called a field. The row is called a record, and the table is called a table. In ERD, the entity corresponds, I make it 3 lines, correspond to table structure. The attributes correspond to columns in Excel, or attribute correspond to field in Access, and occurrence corresponds in Excel to row and corresponds to, that's a semicolon, and corresponds to a record in Access.